What's up, Green Bay Packers fans? Welcome back. And as always, thank you for joining me. My name is Paul Brettel. And today we are going to discuss my big takeaways from each position group now that the Packers have their first week of training camp practices complete. It is Sunday. They are off today. They will be back on the practice field on Monday, fully in pads, so the real football can begin. But before we get to that point and start dissecting all of that, the Packers do have 4 practices under their belt at this point. 3 of them were at full speed. And so, with roughly 1 week behind us, I wanted to take the time to reflect. And again, with my big takeaway from each position group. Before I dive into that, as always, you can find me on Twitter at Paul_Brettel. And you can find all my work over at Dairyland Express as well as Packers Wire. Please hit like, hit subscribe on the video. I do greatly appreciate it. So now let's dive on in. And of course, we'll start with the quarterback. And I talked about this on yesterday's video with my takeaways from Saturday's practice, but Love really, really shined on Saturday from a numbers standpoint. Again, Rob Demovsky of ESPN was charting each of these throws. Love was 16 for 22 on the day during a 2-minute drill that the Packers did, simulating the final 2 minutes before halftime was a specific scenario. He was 4 of 7, led the Packers down to the 1-yard line where they ended up kicking a field goal against the defense, and had a really, really impressive throw to Samori Toure for 33 yards. During the previous team drills, the Packers had been throwing a lot of out routes. That's what Toure initially ran. Rasul Douglas thought that's where the ball was going, but Toure turned upfield down the left sideline, and Love dropped the ball in there perfectly. If it had been a little bit too far to the left, it would have drifted Toure out of bounds and may not have been a catch. If it would have been a little bit too far to the right, Darnell Savage was coming over from the safety position to help. Probably would have been a pass breakup, but he dropped the ball in there perfectly to Toure. So just a really, really overall impressive performance. But to go beyond those numbers for a second, Matt LaFleur has talked about this on multiple occasions and even talked about the process prior to Saturday's practice when Love had this performance. That's where LaFleur's attention is right now with Love. It's on the process. And if Love can consistently get the process right, the results more often than not are going to take care of themselves. So by the process, what Matt LaFleur means is getting in and out of the huddle efficiently, getting everyone lined up correctly. Is Love being balanced when he's in the pocket? What's his decision making like? What's his footwork? Is he going through his progressions? Is he accurate? Knowing when to buy time in the pocket and use his legs. And that is all of that really culminated yesterday. It was such a buttoned up, clean performance from Love from a process standpoint. And again, so we saw the results take care of themselves in that regard. So easily Love's best performance of training camp so far. And I know it's only been a few practices, and likely also his best performance on the practice field as a Green Bay Packer to date. Next up, the running back. Tyler Goodson, his versatility, I think, is really setting him apart in that running back 3 battle. So as we know, Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon are, of course, running backs 1 and 2 on the roster. The third running back spot is up for grabs between Goodson, rookie Lou Nichols, and then Patrick Taylor, who held that position last year. But Tyler Goodson has been in a do-it-all role. And on yesterday's video, I compared it to Tyler Ervin from a few years ago. If you remember the former Packer, Goodson's been lined up in the slot. He's been lined up in the backfield. He's been lined up out wide. He's been a ball carrier. He's been targeted in the passing game. The Packers have used him as a motion man on jet sweep, end around type play. So he's really being asked to do a lot within this offense. And, you know, as they say, when you're fighting for a roster spot, the more you can do. And he's really proven that right now. And I really think with Jordan Love at quarterback this year, that motion role within the offense is going to take on a much larger role. Obviously, there's the big play potential that can come with giving that playmaking ball carrier the ball in the backfield. They're in space. They have some momentum going when they get the ball. Hopefully, creates some big plays, but also it's what it does for the rest of the offense. You know, when that player's in motion just before the snap, it's forcing the defense to make last second adjustments. They also have to decipher who has the ball carrier, the quarterback, and it can lead to some hesitation. And as we know in the game of football at the NFL level specifically, it only takes, you know, half a second for a passing lane to open or for a blocker to get positioned correctly, that it opens up opportunities for others. So I think that's going to be a much more prominent role for the Packers this year. And Tyler Goodson is absolutely someone who could fill it. And Jaden Reed's another name to watch as well in terms of that specific motion gadget type role. But if I was ranking the Packers running backs for that running three battle based on what I've seen so far, Tyler Goodson's at the top, followed by Lou Nichols, and then Patrick Taylor. Next up, the tight end position. All four of these guys, based on what I've seen so far, are going to have specific and active roles in the offense this season. You have Luke Musgrave, who's been with the starters since day one, brings playmaking ability to this offense as someone who can stretch the field, someone who could be targeted over the middle for yard after the catch potential, and just with his size and speed, just a real matchup problem. And then you have Josiah DeGuara, who fills that H-back role, lining up in the backfield quite often, can line up in line, takes on a large blocking role, but defenses also have to respect his ability to impact the passing game as well. And it's a small sample size, but we've seen from DeGuara that he has some after the catch ability with the ball in his hands. Tyler Davis, I think he's been the most steady blocking tight end that the Packers have had in training camp so far. I mentioned yesterday there was a couple reps against Lucas Van Ness when he was blocking that I thought he held up really, really well. And for a young position group where the transition to the NFL for rookies is quite difficult, specifically as blockers, and I wrote about this over at Dairyland Express with quotes from Luke Musgrave on that. Go check that out. But there is that difficult transition. And when you have someone like Tyler Davis who can provide stability, provide reliability in such an important role within the Matt LaFleur offense at the tight end position, he's going to carve out a role. And then you have Tucker Kraft. He's someone that I believe the Packers want to be more of an inline blocking tight end. Again, there's a transition that's going to come with that for him. There's going to be ups and downs. They're going to have to weather the storm to a degree that comes with relying on a young player, but he also has after the catch ability at South Dakota State during his college career, was very, very good after the catch. So all of these guys can fill multiple roles, but they all, as you can see, have kind of defined traits, qualities, skill sets to their game that can allow them to have specific roles within the entire LaFleur offense as well. And I think that's what we're going to see this season. Of course, I expect Musgrave and Josiah DeGuara to handle the majority of the snaps at tight end, but Tyler Davis, Tucker Kraft, they're going to be big parts of it as well. We are going to see all four of these guys in the rotation. And then one other note on the tight end position, I've talked about this several times if you've been keeping up with these post-training camp videos, but a lot of 12 personnel, a lot of two tight end sets. Packers did a lot last year, and we're going to continue to see it a lot this year. At the receiver position, my big takeaway isn't just about one particular player, but the position group as a whole. It's really attacking the middle of the field. And that is one really big difference, I believe, is we're going to see between a Jordan Love offense versus an Aaron Rodgers offense. Aaron Rodgers preferred to attack the boundaries. The Matt LaFleur offense is, an important element of that, though, is going at the middle of the field. It gets the pass catchers in space, especially for this Green Bay offense. That's really important because they have so much speed. Christian Watson, 4.36 40. Packers said prior to the draft that they clocked Jaden Reed running a 4.37 time. Luke Musgrave's one of the fastest tight ends in this draft class, and it was a really, really athletic draft class. So getting those guys the ball in space over the middle, it's going to lead to hopefully, relatively easier completions and yard after the catch potential for them, creating big plays. It's an important part. We look at the San Francisco 49ers offense under Kyle Shanahan, which of course is where this Matt LaFleur offense stems from. And Jimmy Garoppolo, going back to 2019, targeted the middle of the field the most out of any quarterback in football, and nearly 60% of his throws. Last year, when Brock Purdy came in and started during his sample size as a starter, he again was up near that 60% mark in terms of throws over the middle of the field. So we're going to see a lot of that this season. Again, opportunity for big plays. It's an important part of the Matt LaFleur offense. And when this offense during these training camp practices and team drills has been finding consistent success, a lot of it is, again, over the middle. Now to the offensive line, Zach Tom, he's the front runner for the right tackle job. He has been starting there each of the practices so far. Josh Nijman has been rotated in at times or mostly been with the twos. And the biggest difference and why this is of note is because if we go back to offseason programs, OTAs and mini camp, at least the practices that were open to the media, Tom and Nijman were often alternating days or sometimes even drills with who started at right tackle. But these first four practices, it has mostly been Zach Tom. So he appears to be the front runner for that role. Going back to last year, right tackle was a new position for both Tom and Nijman. Nijman had spent his career previously on the left side. Tom was a left tackle in college and a center. So it was new to both of them, but Tom did hold up better during that sample size from last season. And again, from what we've seen up to this point, I think he's held up better as well, specifically in pass protection. But again, the pads come on this upcoming week, and that's really going to tell us, start telling us where everyone really stands. Now let's jump to the defensive side of the ball. The interior defensive line, big thing that stands out for me is just the speed that this unit has. The additions of Kobe Wood and Carl Brooks, Devontae Wyatt taking on a much larger role from a 40 time, from a relative athletic score perspective. Devontae Wyatt, Kobe Wooden, speed wise are, they're among the elite of the elite from those numbers among interior defensive linemen with the speed that they bring. And it's incredibly evident from, if the ball carrier is moving sideline to sideline, their ability to flow with them, or at times where they just knife through into the backfield at just a really, really quick pace. You see that speed, and to a degree, it's a bit new for this Packers interior defensive line. I wrote about this over at Packers Wire. There's been over the last 2 years in terms of the personnel that Brian Gutekunst has brought in. There's been a shift in the type of interior defender that the Packers want. We think of past Packers interior defenders, Dean Lowry, Tyler Lancaster in recent years. Those are guys who clog up the middle. They eat up space. They're meant to, again, clog up holes in running lanes. Whereas you have your Devontae Wyatt, Carl Brooks, Kobe Wooden, those are gap penetrators. They're trying to knife through and get to the quarterback as quickly as possible versus trying to take up that space. And reason that's of note, the Play Callers podcast presented by The Athletic, if you haven't listened to it, absolutely go do. It's a terrific listen. Brandon Staley, who's the head coach of Los Angeles Chargers, talked about how versatility and that finding that gap penetrating interior defender is incredibly important to his defensive scheme. So how does that apply to the Green Bay Packers? Joe Barry, Packers defensive coordinator, was brought in by Matt LaFleur to run a similar style defense to Brandon Staley from that Vic Fangio type tree. So these type of interior defenders, on paper anyways, really fit what this defensive scheme looks for in that type of player. And again, you're really seeing that on the field. That's something that's really jumped out to me. Edge rusher, Lucas Van Ness. I cannot wait to see him in the pads. Out of all the players on this roster, he may be the one who's going to benefit the most from when the pads come on, because now he can start bull rushing. Now he can start really using his power, which is the strength of his game. You do not have to watch many snaps of him on the practice field to see his burst at the snap and his power, his pop when he attacks the tight end or attacks the offensive tackle. And there was one play from OTAs where he had Josh Nijman on his heels as he pushed him back. And then during Saturday's practice, it looked like he basically threw Josiah DeGore into the backfield. The play was blown dead because Van Ness just absolutely wrecked it. So really excited to see what he can do in terms of what his role is going to be in the edge rusher rotation. That's something that I think we still have to see right now. He's been consistently with the second team defense, often him and JJ Enagbare, and then Justin Hollins and Preston Smith have been with the starters. But on Saturday during that practice I just mentioned, Van Ness got a lot of snaps with the ones. And what I think we can say is during those third downs or obvious passing situations is where we can count on seeing him on the field and even rushing from the interior like the Packers did with Za'Darius Smith. If you remember, in those obvious passing situations, a lot of times we would see Za'Darius Smith standing up over the center as a pass rusher. That's something that Brian Gutekunst mentioned after the draft, that we could see Van Ness used in that capacity. So very, very excited to see him on the football field in pads and what he can do. One other note with Van Ness, his pass rush ability is what stands out. It's what's the most exciting part of his game to watch. But I've been impressed with the several plays and how he's held up against the run. It can be really aggressive, or it can be really easy as an edge rusher where, a lot of times your success is measured on pressures and sacks to just make a beeline to the backfield for the quarterback or the ball carrier. But it's also important in run defense to set the edge to make sure that the ball carrier can't bounce outside. And there's been a few plays where I've seen Van Ness do that really well, forcing the ball carrier, the running back inside where the interior defenders can make a play. He did that again on Saturday. A.J. Dillon had nowhere to go to the outside, went back in. T.J. Slaton's waiting there for him. So been really impressed with that part of his game. And that aspect of playing edge rusher is one area where the Packers edge rusher unit as a whole can really improve. Linebacker position, Quay Walker, Devondre Campbell, they have just been very, very steady, very, very reliable through the start of these practices. Campbell and Walker, they've been a big, for the first two practices, the front seven as a whole, I thought it held up really well against the run. There weren't a ton of running lanes, and Campbell and Walker played a key part of that, flowing to the ball carriers, meeting them at the line of scrimmage or close to it, limiting any potential gains that the running backs were going to have. And Jerry Montgomery, interior defensive line coach or run game coordinator, obviously being better against the run starts with that group, but he said it best. It's going to take the entire front seven to see this unit really transform from a run defense perspective. So been really impressed with them in that regard. And then in the passing game, both of them have been around the football, either there to break up the pass or to make the tackle right away. This has been just a really, really solid, sound performance from both linebackers to start. On to the cornerbacks. In not so surprising news, Jaire Alexander's been playing really, really well. The ball's either not going his direction, or when it does, he's there to force the pass breakup or come away with the interception. Again, that's not breaking any news by any means, but he's been playing at a really, really high level. And after one of the practices this past week, I got to ask Christian Watson about that. He's a young player still developing, and what it's like to go up against Jaire Alexander, Rasul Douglas. You hope it's one of those situations where iron sharpens iron, and while Watson, Dobbs, Jayden Reed, they may take some lumps in practice because they're going up against a player of Jaire Alexander's level of his skill set. You hope in the long run it helps continue to shorten that learning curve. So when they get to game day, they're now able to make a greater impact sooner because of who they're practicing against. And Christian Watson in the locker room said something to that effect. He said, it's another opportunity to get better every day when we're going up against them. Some other notes at the cornerback position: Corey Ballentine and Carrington Valentine, rookie 7th round pick. They've been the go-to boundary options with the second team defense. And then Innis Gaines, listed as a safety, he spent a lot of time with the second team defense playing in the slot behind Keyshawn Nixon. All right, on to the safety position. It feels like the depth chart is starting to kind of take shape a little bit. Matt LaFleur said once the pads come on, we're going to continue to see a pretty consistent rotation of who's getting those snaps. There's still a lot of discovery to take place in terms of who's going to potentially see playing time, who's going to make the roster. But between OTA's mini camp and these first 4 training camp practices, it feels like the depth chart is at least starting to take shape. Right now, Darnell Savage and Rudy Ford are the consistent starting options at the safety position. We know Savage is going to be starting there week 1. Matt LaFleur said Saturday morning before practice that he's had a really strong start to camp. And then Rudy Ford, I've talked about it here previously, provided stability last year, willing tackler, just did his job. He was where he was supposed to be, and then that led to some takeaway opportunities as well. Had 3 interceptions, a fumble recovery, and out of the safety room, excluding Savage, he has the most experience on the team in this Joe Barry defense. So those are your starters. With the second defense, it really looks like Jonathan Owens and Tavarius Moore are starting to separate themselves. Jonathan Owens was a starter for the Texans last season. That was his first full season as a starter, and was one of the most reliable tackling safeties in football. Again, an area where the Packers need to improve. Tavarius Moore has spent his previous 4 seasons with the 49ers. 2022, he was primarily a special teams player. 2021, he missed the entire year with an Achilles injury. And then in 2020, he was played about over 500 defensive snaps. has really, really good speed, ran in the high 4.3s. And then he also in the Super Bowl, when the Niners were in the Super Bowl during that 2020 season, he did get an interception off Patrick Mahomes. So those two seem to be establishing themselves as the secondary options. And then there's Dallin Levitt, where I'm guessing we're not going to see him on the field defensively, but he is a core special teams player. And there was an instance or two last seasons where Aaron Rodgers brought him up on his own, discussing Levitt's leadership qualities that he brings to the locker room. So maybe he's not quite in the roster lock category, but I bet he's pretty close to it. So those five have seemingly really established themselves as that might be what the safety room looks like come week one. Now you'll notice rookie Anthony Johnson, 7th-round pick. He's consistently been with the third team defense. While he's an exciting player and one I know many Packer fans were happy that they were able to get, from a development standpoint, it's important to keep in mind this is only his second season at the position. So not only is he making the jump from college to the NFL, he's still relatively new. He spent his first 4 seasons at Iowa State playing as a boundary cornerback. So this may end up being more of a development, more of a redshirt-esque type season for him. Lastly, special teams, ups and downs for Anders Carlson. So during minicamp, Carlson had 12 field goal attempts. He went 11 for 12. The start of training camp here, he was 5 of 6 to begin. Really, really strong start for the rookie. Saturday, however, he went 1 for 6. He was 0 for 3 from 40 to 45 yards, and then just 1 for 3 from 50 to 55 yards. It's crystal clear. He has a big leg. But as Matt LaFleur said, the key for him is going to be all about consistency. He needs to harness that power. And we saw what can go awry on Saturday when that consistency is off. And in terms of adding another kicker to the competition, Brian Gutekunst was asked about this during Tuesday's press conference, and he didn't close the door on it by any means, but they're going to give Carlson the opportunity here in training camp. He needs the reps. He needs the opportunities to show what he can do. So they're going to give him that, see what he does, and then from there, they'll make a decision whether or not they want to add someone. But he's a rookie kicker. The Packers know that they're going to have to weather the storm of inconsistency to agree. They know that there are going to be days like we just saw on Saturday. But for the time being, he's going to have the runway to try to prove himself as the kicker for the 2023 season here. So there you have it. My big takeaways from each of the Green Bay Packers position groups. As always, I thank you for tuning in. Thank you for joining me. You can find me on Twitter at Paul_Brettel. Find all my work at Dairyland Express as well as Packers Wire. And please hit like, please hit subscribe. I greatly appreciate it. So until next time, friends, take care, stay safe, and as always, go Pack Go.